All right, let's talk to the property owners now. And rising municipal rates and taxes are really becoming a nightmare for owners of rental properties, especially. The increased operating costs are taking a sizable chunk out of property income. This, coupled with the declining rental prices due to our stagnant economy, of course, and people not earning what they should be earning and the cost of living going up, is frustrating many landlords. FNB senior economist John Loos back with us again. John, always very gracious with his time. Hello to you, John. Good to have you back with us. So it's becoming a bit of a problem now, because when I was growing up, Dad always said to me, get your money into property. But it's starting to become very difficult to do, isn't it?
Well, yes, it hasn't been the greatest period for property. Well, ever since the end of the boom years prior to the GFC, property hasn't performed wonderfully on a national average basis. And, a lot has to do with the longer-term stagnation of the economy since around about 2011, 2012, just after a post-GFC recovery. So rental income growth is not what it used to be. In real terms, it's been declining in recent years on commercial properties. And then to boot, you've got this ongoing above inflation municipal rates and tariff increases, electricity tariff increases, which are difficult to avoid. Well, rates increases, very difficult to avoid. Electricity, there are alternatives popping up now, but also quite challenging to avoid. So these rates and utilities costs are a big operating cost item. And on commercial properties, on average, in 2008, the two of them, all of them together, were probably about 11% of gross income on property, and they've increased to probably double that, over 20% of income received on property. So it has become more of an issue, and it's particularly now an issue at a time when rental growth is not that easy to achieve, because the tenant population is under pressure too.
Yeah, it certainly is, because of the cost of living as well. So having a bit of extra money to maybe take on a slightly bigger rental as your family gets bigger is no longer an option as well. I'm going to ask you about the cost of living and the impact it's now having. Are we able to talk numbers as to the drop in a rental market? I'm not sure if you have that information at hand, but I imagine for a landlord, whether it's an apartment block or even a business or private landlord, is struggling to get people in. But before I do that, you were using the acronym GFC. Just help me understand what that is. I know you spoke about that, John.
That was the global financial crisis around about 2008 and 9. Before that, we had a particularly good economic period. We had a property boom period, and even what some would, including myself, would call a housing market bubble. It was that strong. Yeah. And so at that time, even if you had things like above inflation rates and tariff increases, although we didn't have such big ones then, but if we had, it would have been less of an issue, because it was a much stronger economic time. The tenant population on the residential and commercial side was stronger financially. So landlords could more easily pass on the costs, the costs of rates and tariffs to the tenant. Yeah. And still achieve significant rental growth. But it's a different story now. The rental market's under pressure. If I look at what MSCI says about commercial property rentals, since about 2015, 2016, in real terms, when you adjust for inflation, they've gone down by near 6%. So, difficult to achieve rentals, and then an increasing portion of that is being eaten up by above inflation rates and tariff increases.
Yeah, it's a staggering amount of money when you start looking at the numbers that have dropped the 6% down, plus the inflation having gone up where it is at the moment as well. We start getting close to double-digit figures. So if we were looking in a market where this was a buyer-seller, this almost in this market now, versus between a tenant and a landlord, this is almost a tenant market, because the tenant has a better chance of getting a cheaper property to rent, because landlords will pretty much take what they can right now. Am I interpreting this correctly?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it is more of a tenant market these days than a number of years ago. But having said that, it's also because the tenants are financially pressured. So it's not like it's all going the tenants' way. They are experiencing economic pressure, and that is why landlords can't just pass all the cost increases onto them that easily. So So both are in a financially tougher situation these days than a couple of years ago. And as a result, municipalities don't necessarily give on this. They're in a sort of a monopolistic situation, so they don't necessarily have to give way on their rates and tariffs. So between the landlord and the tenant, they have to jointly absorb the cost increases, I'd say, largely together.
Yeah, and as I say goodbye to you, John, just talk to me about being a landlord at the moment. Is it a good space to move into if you haven't? And for those who are already a landlord at the moment, they're in this sector, what advice do you give them?
Yeah, it's tough to say it's a good or bad time. It's probably, I'd say it's a tougher time than what it was a number of years ago, and it probably will be tough for the foreseeable future because the tenant population will be under financial pressure for as long as the economy is in such a stagnant position. I think the thing to do is always, if you look at it on the residential side, to vet your tenants well through bureaus like TPN who look at tenant performance, and to go for quality tenants, possibly sacrificing a bit on income for a quality tenant. It's important that you have a tenant with a good track record at least, who's financially solid. It's very important to vet them.
Vetting it's all the more important these days, as you quite rightly say, John, especially with people who are not earning what they should be earning. Perhaps they're moving money around. You might end up with a tenant who actually can't pay their bill at the end of the month. John Loos, always wonderful to have you with us. Thanks for making sense of it for me. F&B property sector strategist, John Loos.